Hey everyone, this is Nick and welcome back to your Linux and open source news show. This week we've got someone forking X.org, but maybe not really for the right reasons. We also have Denmark planning to ditch Microsoft products and move to Linux, Nextcloud, LibreOffice, and all of that jazz. And we also have Google releasing the source code for Android 16, but it's missing some crucial parts for custom Android ROMs, which is going to make the whole custom ROM ecosystem way worse. And of course, before we get started, we've got this message from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Squarespace. It's your all-in-one platform to create, publish, and manage your website. Squarespace has really easy tools to make sure that anyone can end up with a really nice looking and well-optimized website, no matter if you know how to code or not. They have what they call their blueprint system, which lets you pick from a variety of templates that are pre-built and will suit any type of website, whether it's a simple blog, an online store, a video platform, whatever. All these templates are optimized by default to give you good SEO, but they also add some SEO specific tools on top of that to make sure that your website just doesn't end up on the last page of Google. On top of that, to go further, Squarespace has their own design engine to create your own pages. You can just drag and drop elements where you want them, you can change all the colors, the fonts, you can just tweak the templates however you want. And once you have something you like, you can add extra features like your own online shop with a payment system, you can design your own logo from Squarespace, you can book your own domain name to have an easy to remember address. So check out squarespace.com/TheLinuxExperiment or just click the link in the description below and you'll get 10% off your first website or domain purchase. So, something pretty weird happened over the weekend, where a freedesktop.org developer was completely banned and removed from the project. Their account, their repos, their tickets, their merge requests were all deleted, all of that on the X.org project specifically. This developer you might have heard about, he's called Enrico Weigelt, and he decided to create a fork of X.org called X11 to try and revive the thing. Now, he positioned his fork as the same thing as what happened to X386 back in the day, where a contributor had been banned from the project and ended up creating X.org, which replaced X386 very quickly. Although, I'm not sure this has anything to do with this situation, because at the time there was no Wayland, so of course a better version of X3 was going to succeed, where a fork of X.org will likely just remain an also ran thing where everyone has already moved to Wayland anyway. Of course, that developer also ended up sabotaging his entire effort by just being very weird about it. He attributed his ban to Red Hat, because some members of the Code of Conduct board who banned him were Red Hat employees, but some of those weren't. Now, to be clear, his removal from X.org stems from a breach of the Code of Conduct, not from Red Hat trying to stamp out an X11 fork, cause they probably couldn't care less. Everyone already adopted Wayland, no one cares about X11 anymore, so they probably don't care about this, and he also was banned by members of the board that aren't Red Hat employees. Second, this person is very well known in the open source development community for being pretty weird. He is a revisionist on World War I and World War II history, has generally all the worst positions on all the most potentially problematic topics, and this is very apparent in how he discussed his own project and how he talked on the Linux kernel mailing list. So to sum it up, yes, you're probably going to get an X11 fork called X11, which might be actually good for people who can't move to Wayland. That's a good thing. The problem is this fork is made by a really weird person with really weird goals and some really weird conspiracy-pilled brain stuff. So yeah, do with that as you will. Personally, I don't care. I'm never going back to anything else than Wayland until Wayland's successor is developed. But if you do want to stick to X11, this might be an avenue you can explore, I guess. And still talking about that Wayland transition, there's more of that happening. Ubuntu 25.10 will follow GNOME in dropping X11 in their GNOME session, which is to say, they're just dropping X11 entirely because Ubuntu uses GNOME by default. We don't have the numbers on Ubuntu or its flavors, but I would be willing to bet that the default Ubuntu with GNOME is the most used flavor of Ubuntu. As GNOME is ditching X.org, Ubuntu doesn't really feel the need to keep it alive, so only a Wayland session will be available, although other flavors, of course, will keep their X11 support because it's still supported in those desktops, and so X.org packages will stay in the repos, and obviously X-Wayland will still work. Manjaro is also moving away from X.org, moving to Wayland by default for their Plasma release. They say that it's now more or less smooth, even with the NVIDIA driver, which I think is an understatement. It just works even with NVIDIA drivers, at least for relatively recent GPUs. It makes sense to follow these trends. GNOME doesn't want to support X11, they're moving away from it, they only are supporting the Wayland session, so Ubuntu would have to tackle on a lot of work to keep supporting X11 as time goes on. It's normal that they're ditching that session on their GNOME flavor. As per Plasma, they've been recommending Wayland since early Plasma 6, they're not enforcing it by any means, but this is the recommended one, and virtually every distro that ships Plasma by default seems to have defaulted to Wayland as well, so this is totally normal as a move also. We also have a good move from Denmark, where the Ministry for Digitalization, so the Ministry for probably tech, the internet and stuff like that, they announced that they want to move away from Microsoft products. Over the next month, half the ministry staff will turn to LibreOffice and Linux and other alternatives as a pilot, and by the end of 2025, the entire ministry should have their entire staff Microsoft-less, so using exclusively open source stuff. Now, the stated goal is, of course, the much touted but never really achieved EU digital sovereignty, meaning the EU does not want all of their tech and software to come from one single country that is not subject to their laws, namely the US. As Denmark is also engaged in a battle of words with the US over Greenland, it makes sense that they would want to make sure that they cannot get shut off from their entire software stack. It is something most European countries are thinking about, but Denmark is the first one to actually really make a big move and commitment at the government level instead of it being at a city or municipality level. Of course, the financial incentive is there too. Apparently, the price of Microsoft products increased 72% in 5 years for Denmark, up $53 million, so that has to be a big point as well. Now, of course, this is not going to be an easy transition. You can't just drop in, replace Windows by Linux, Exchange and Outlook with Nextcloud, and then Microsoft Office with LibreOffice. You have to train people, you have to explain to them the differences, you have to train your entire staff to use it, to maintain it, to keep using it, to update it. It's not a simple process, and in the short term it probably costs more to do that transition than to keep paying for the next maybe 2 or 3 years what Microsoft is asking for. But it is crucial for most European countries to just take control of their software ecosystem, especially looking at what's happening in the world currently. You do not want to be beholden to someone else for something as crucial. But also, this would be a major help for open source. Imagine if the entire EU moved to Linux, LibreOffice, and Nextcloud. Those things would just explode in popularity. Kids would learn to use them at school, meaning companies would probably have to adopt them as well. It's just a giant snowball effect that would be really, really awesome. So props to Denmark, and hopefully other countries can follow suit. Now, Android seems to be losing some of its open, adaptable nature. Google first turned the development process of Android private, meaning that you can't really participate in the development of a fixed version of Android. All you get is the final source code for that version that is being dropped by Google. That source code dropped for Android 16, but it's missing a big, important part for custom ROMs. This is the device trees for Pixel devices, so basically all the text files that describe the hardware and how it's supposed to work, but also binary drivers for those Pixel devices. People started thinking that maybe the Android open source project was being killed, to which Google said no, it's not, but they did confirm that they voluntarily left out the device trees and drivers for Pixels, stating that the Android open source project needs to be device independent, and as such, they will instead support a virtual Android device called Cuttlefish. Obviously, this is not as good for development because you want to be able to test your potential custom ROM on actual real hardware with an actual real phone. A VM running on a PC can only go so far. But also, it really matters because most custom Android ROMs relied on all that pixel-specific code to at least have solid compatibility with, at the very least, the pixel line. Without all of these files, they will have to reverse engineer every single change Google made on every single minor and major version of Android. This will take, obviously, much longer if it's at all doable. Google also apparently reduced the commit history of their Android kernel source code to a single line. They squashed it, and so you don't have the individual commit history. So reverse engineering changes is also going to be much harder because you don't know exactly which commit changed what, and the dev process is behind closed doors, so you can't even rely on that. Now, let's be clear, Google doesn't have to release any of this or help custom ROMs. They're still releasing the source code, they're following the principle of open source here. But it is certain that custom Android ROMs will now struggle to have a reliable line of devices that their ROM really runs well on. This used to be the pixels, but also they're gonna have to spend more time making those pixels work, meaning they're gonna have less time to support actual other devices that aren't pixels. All in all, it is a really bad move for custom ROMs, and it's probably what Google is really trying to achieve here. Now, something that will please some users but turn others against GNOME even more, the desktop will gain more dependencies on systemd. First, GDM, the login manager, will use UserDB, which is a systemd subsystem, to make sure that remote logins and multiple graphical sessions can work properly. GDM also used to provide some GNOME 2 era hacks that let it work by using a bunch of .desktop files to start a GNOME session and the GNOME services if systemd was not present. This will be discontinued, so GDM will only work if systemd is present on the system. This should let them implement session restore and save, because that old hack just could not support that properly. Now, GNOME obviously thus recommends that distributions that ship GNOME use GNOME with systemd if they want to use a supported path, but they also say that distros can implement replacements by relying on other systems, and GNOME developers have added some code that lets distributions plug other login systems and session management systems into GDM. They also point out that distros will need to implement their own session manager to replace the old hacky one GNOME uprooted if they don't want to use systemd. This will all happen for GNOME 49. I don't think it is a big issue. Most distributions do use systemd. The ones that don't make that a selling point, and they probably already know how to uproot and replace various systems, so they will have some extra work to do if they want to provide a GNOME session, but that's kind of their selling point. They do the extra work so you don't have systemd. Personally, I don't care. Systemd works well, it's fine. Sure, it's big, it's monolithic, it does too many things, but it just works, it's easy to use, I like it, so if GNOME wants to depend more on it, I don't really have an issue with that. It's just a bit more work for distros who don't want systemd, but they probably already didn't really enjoy shipping or using GNOME anyway. Now, Linux Mint has some more news to share. First, about fingerprint authentication. This is something that's coming to Mint 22.2 with a new app called Fingwit, which for some reason sounds to me as something offensive or maybe something kinda kinky. I'm not sure why. Obviously, this app only works if a fingerprint reader is detected, and it lets you record your fingerprints and use them for logging in, for getting out of the screensaver, for sudo commands, or for the various graphical admin authentication prompts. The application is also relatively smart. It can switch from asking you your fingerprint or your password for the instances where your password is actually needed, like for example, decrypting your home directory. They also made progress on their Libadwaita fork called Libadwaita. This is in line with what they want to do to make Libadwaita apps look better integrated in Linux Mint, and so Libadwaita will use the same look as Libadwaita, but it will follow the user's themes and the proper window controls when the user changes those things. Developers can also switch between Libadwaita and Libadwaita without changing the code of their app, meaning that if developers are so inclined, they could support both, and so on distributions that provide Libadwaita, like Mint, their apps will follow some parts of users' themes, but on distros that only provide Libadwaita, they will still work properly. Not sure if I really like the idea of this fork. This will add some work on the plate of Linux Mint just for the sake of making apps a bit more visually compatible. They already provide that using specific style sheets that theme Libadwaita apps to make them look like Mint apps, or at least use the same kind of color palette. They also have the accent color portal implemented. I don't know if they really needed to go this extra step for the rest of the Linux ecosystem to have an option. I'm also not sure if developers opting to use Libadwaita will start implementing a few lines of code to either use Libadwaita or Libadwaita, because this could theoretically break their apps depending on what the users does with this, which is what Libadwaita was made to fix. Not sure about this, but being developed, it just doesn't hurt anyone, so it's not a problem. Now, as the WordPress ecosystem descends into anarchy, with Automatic, the company behind it, making a bunch of moves against other actors who just seem to be using their open source rights, the Linux Foundation is stepping in. They've started the Fair Package Management project to create an independent and decentralized repo for plugins and themes for WordPress, likely to ensure that this main repo doesn't stay under Automatic's sole control, or under anyone else's for that matter. The Fair Package Manager is federated, it won't depend on a single source, it won't be a Linux Foundation only thing, and it will help with privacy as well because, well, you can use repos that don't have any telemetry or any data transmission to commercial entities. It should also help with security because they would probably standardize practices on how you can access various repos and how you get plugins and themes. Of course, that package repo is open source, it accepts external contributions, and to start using it, you just have to install a plugin that gives you access to that plugin repo. There's also a full distribution of WordPress with the Fair Package Manager pre-installed if you'd like to deploy a new website. Now, this sounds good to me. I didn't really follow closely the WordPress drama. From what I gathered, it seemed that the main contributor to WordPress, a company called Automatic, is starting to lose it, basically, and trying to shoot down their competitors and even some of their users. I don't think that's great, but I'm not an expert on the topic, so I won't talk more about it. I think it's good to have a decentralized repo anyway, and if the Linux Foundation manages to make sure that every single same version of WordPress has to access the same version of this package repo so security is handled properly, that would probably be good as well. Finally, on the gaming news side of things, Microsoft unveiled their partner-built Xbox handheld, which is going to compete directly with SteamOS. It is the ROG Xbox Ally, and it looks like a cross between the ROG Ally and a PlayStation Portal, because it has those nice long handles to grip onto. We don't have a price yet, but we do know a few things. First, it comes with a new full-screen Xbox interface made specifically for handhelds, as well as an Xbox button to switch between apps and games and open the game bar. Microsoft said that they also modified Windows specifically for that handheld. The lock screen and task switcher were modified to be usable with a controller, and also performance has been tuned so Windows isn't as bloated on that device. So Microsoft is perfectly aware of the current limitations of Windows 11 and the fact that SteamOS just is beating them in every measure that matters. They're trying to bridge the gap here. The device has a Ryzen Z2 CPU, 16 gigs of RAM, 512 gigs of storage, a 1080p 7-inch screen running at 120 Hz, and Hall effect triggers. There's also a more premium model called the ROG Ally X, which seems to be the higher end of the two, with 24 gigs of RAM and 1 TB of storage, plus a Ryzen Z2 Extreme CPU. They both have 2 USB-C ports, but on the ROG Xbox Ally X model, a terrible name if I ever had to pronounce one of those ports is Thunderbolt 4. You also have a 60 Wh battery on the base model and an 80 Wh battery on the X more premium model. Now we'll see if this thing makes a splash or if the Steam Deck still dominates this device category. The fact that Microsoft has realized that they really need a specific gaming interface that centralizes all your games is probably going to be a problem for SteamOS. The optimization of the Windows will also matter quite a bit. If Microsoft manages to catch up in terms of performance on the same hardware with SteamOS and has a suitable controller-friendly interface, then SteamOS is in trouble, because as a manufacturer, you're probably always going to use the OS that has the same performance, a good enough interface, but also the entire game library. SteamOS might be awesome, but it doesn't work with all the games. Its only advantages right now is that it probably doesn't cost a thing, or it costs probably a lot less than a Windows license. It has a better interface and better performance. If Microsoft can slash down two of those things, then probably we're gonna see less SteamOS and it's gonna just be nipped in the bud, which would suck for Linux gaming. What doesn't suck for Linux gaming though is our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. They make laptops and desktops that ship with Linux pre-installed, so you know that when you buy from them, you get a device that really works well with Linux. You can buy them with any of their pre-installed distros, but you can also just slap the one that you want, and things will just work. I only use their computers these days. Everything you can hear or watch from my channel is done on one of their laptops running their distro, Tuxedo OS, and all of my gaming is done on one of their desktops as well. They have a big range of computers. You should be able to find anything, whatever the need you have. If it's a small laptop all the way up to a workstation or gaming PC, they have it all. Plenty of options for the hardware, for the keyboard layouts. They're really, really good. So I left a link to Tuxedo Computers website in the description. Click it if you need a new computer. Okay, so thanks for listening to or simply watching this video. You know where all the YouTube buttons are, you know why you need to click them, no need to bother you with that, and you also know where all the links to support the channel are. You can get some pretty cool benefits if you become a Patreon member or a YouTube member. Thank you all for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!